Imagine a cold and damp November night in London in the year 1605, where the fog clings to the cobblestones and shadows stretch long across the Thames River. Beneath the majestic structure of the House of Lords, a solitary man stands in the dark confines of a rented undercroft, surrounded by 36 barrels of gunpowder, hidden under piles of firewood and coal. He holds a slow-burning match and a pocket watch, waiting for the precise moment to strike a blow that would decapitate the English government in a single fiery explosion. The man was Guy Fawkes, and his name would become synonymous with treason and failed revolution for centuries to come. But who was the mastermind behind this audacious plan, and how close did they actually come to succeeding in their deadly mission to kill the king? To understand the gravity of the Gunpowder Plot, one must first look at the volatile political and religious landscape of England at the turn of the 17th century. Queen Elizabeth I had died in 1603, ending the Tudor dynasty and bringing King James I of England and VI of Scotland to the throne. The Catholic population of England had suffered greatly under Elizabeth, with heavy fines and persecution for practicing their faith, and they looked to James with a desperate hope for tolerance. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic martyr in their eyes, and many believed he would relax the penal laws that strangled their community. However, their optimism was quickly shattered when James declared his hatred for the Catholic religion and ordered all priests to leave the country. The disappointment among the English Catholics soon turned to anger, and for a small group of radicalized men, that anger hardened into a resolve to take drastic action. The leader of this group was not Guy Fawkes, as is commonly believed, but a charismatic and wealthy gentleman named Robert Catesby. Catesby was a man of intense religious fervor and personal magnetism, who had already participated in the failed rebellion of the Earl of Essex years prior. He possessed a brooding intensity and a persuasive tongue that allowed him to recruit others to his dangerous cause. Catesby believed that the only way to restore Catholicism to England was to remove King James and his entire Protestant government in one catastrophic event during the state opening of Parliament. In May of 1604, Catesby gathered his first recruits at the Dock and Drake Inn, located in the fashionable Strand district of London. Among them were Thomas Wintour, a capable soldier and diplomat, and John Wright, a skilled swordsman with a reputation for bravery. It was here, behind closed doors and hushed voices, that Catesby first whispered his terrible plan to blow up the House of Lords with gunpowder when the king and his heirs were present. The men swore an oath of secrecy upon a prayer book and took communion to seal their pact, binding their lives and souls to the success of the plot. They knew that failure meant a traitor's death, but they believed their cause was divinely ordained. Realizing they needed a man with specialized military experience to handle the explosives, the conspirators recruited Guy Fawkes. Fawkes was a convert to Catholicism who had spent years fighting for the Spanish army in the Netherlands, where he gained a reputation for great courage and technical expertise in siege warfare. He was a man of action rather than words, and his stoic nature made him the perfect candidate to guard the gunpowder and light the fuse. Fawkes returned to England under the alias John Johnson, posing as a servant to another conspirator named Thomas Percy, who had gained access to a house near the prince's chamber. The stage was set, and the men began their slow and dangerous work. The initial plan involved digging a tunnel from their rented house directly under the foundations of the Parliament building, which was grueling and backbreaking labor. The thick stone walls of the ancient palace proved to be a formidable obstacle, and the men worked in shifts while water seeped into their excavation site. They lived in constant fear of discovery, as the sound of their pickaxes might be heard by the guards patrolling above or by neighbors passing in the street. However, their luck changed when they discovered that a ground floor cellar directly beneath the House of Lords was available for rent. This undercroft was the perfect location to store the gunpowder without the need for a tunnel. Thomas Percy used his connections to lease the cellar, and the conspirators began the arduous task of moving the gunpowder from a house across the river in Lambeth. Under the cover of darkness, they ferried the barrels across the Thames and carefully rolled them into the cellar, concealing them beneath faggots of wood and lumps of coal. By May of 1605, they had stockpiled 36 barrels of gunpowder, which was more than enough to reduce the entire building to rubble and kill everyone within a large radius. The sheer scale of the explosives suggests they intended total annihilation, leaving no survivors among the royal family or the members of Parliament. As the months passed, the group of conspirators grew to 13 men, including wealthy figures like Ambrose Rookwood and Francis Tresham, who were brought in to provide funds for horses and weapons. The plan extended beyond the explosion in London, as they intended to incite a rebellion in the Midlands and kidnap the king's young daughter, Princess Elizabeth. They planned to install her as a puppet queen who would be raised as a Catholic, thus securing the future of the faith in England. It was a complex and multifaceted coup that required precise timing and absolute secrecy. But as the number of people involved increased, so did the risk of a leak. The opening of Parliament was delayed several times due to the plague which lingered in London, and this delay tested the nerves of the plotters. They had to ensure the gunpowder remained dry and potent in the damp cellar, while maintaining their covered lives without arousing suspicion. Guy Fawkes traveled abroad briefly to ensure he was not recognized and to seek support from foreign Catholic powers, though he was careful not to reveal the specifics of the plot. By late October 1605, everything was in place, and the date was finally set for Tuesday, the 5th of November. The king and the entire political establishment would be gathered in one room, and the fuse was ready to be lit. However, the bonds of loyalty within the group were tested when some conspirators began to worry about fellow Catholics who would be present at the opening of Parliament. On October 26th, an anonymous letter was delivered to Lord Monteagle, a prominent Catholic peer, and the brother-in-law of conspirator Francis Tresham. The letter contained a cryptic but chilling warning advising Monteagle to devise some excuse to miss the Parliament session, for they shall receive a terrible blow, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. This letter, known to history as the Monteagle Letter, was the pivotal clue that would unravel the entire conspiracy. Lord Monteagle immediately took the letter to Robert Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury, who was the King's Secretary of State and the spymaster of the realm. Cecil was a cunning and astute politician who had long suspected that the Catholics were plotting against the throne. He decided to wait and watch, allowing the plot to mature, so he could catch the conspirators red-handed. He showed the letter to King James, who possessed a morbid fear of violent death, and the king correctly interpreted the phrase "terrible blow" as a reference to an explosion. Despite the warning, the conspirators learned of the letter, but Catesby convinced them to proceed, believing the government did not have enough specific information to stop them. On Monday, the 4th of November, the Lord Chamberlain led a search party to inspect the Parliament buildings, including the cellars and undercrofts. They found a large pile of firewood in the cellar rented by Thomas Percy, and they encountered a man who identified himself as John Johnson. The man appeared calm and stated he was merely looking after his master's fuel supply, but his appearance and the sheer volume of wood aroused suspicion. The king ordered a second, more thorough search to be conducted later that night. The net was closing in, but Guy Fawkes remained at his post, armed with a lantern and the means to ignite the powder. Around midnight, Sir Thomas Knivet, a justice of the peace, and a small band of armed men returned to the cellar for a detailed inspection. They discovered Guy Fawkes leaving the Undercroft dressed in a cloak and boots, and immediately seized him. A struggle ensued, but the soldiers overpowered him, and upon searching his person, they found a pocket watch, slow matches, and touchwood. They then cleared away the firewood and discovered the 36 barrels of gunpowder hidden beneath. The plot had been foiled merely hours before the king was due to arrive. Fawkes was arrested and dragged before the king in his bedchamber for immediate questioning. When questioned by the king and his counsel, Guy Fawkes displayed a defiant and unyielding demeanor that shocked and impressed his captors. He admitted his intent to blow up the Parliament and expressed regret only that he had failed to kill the Scotsman who sat on the throne. He refused to name his accomplices, insisting he had acted alone, but the authorities knew a plot of this magnitude required a network of traitors. Fawkes was then transferred to the Tower of London, a formidable fortress and prison, where he would face the horrors of interrogation. King James issued a warrant authorizing the use of torture, starting with the gentler methods and proceeding to the rack. Meanwhile, the news of Fawkes's capture spread like wildfire through London, and the other conspirators fled the city in a panic. They rode hard for the Midlands, hoping to rally support for their planned uprising, even though the main explosion had failed. Catesby and the others arrived at Holbeach House in Staffordshire, exhausted and wet from the rain. In a bizarre twist of irony, they attempted to dry some damp gunpowder in front of an open fire, and a spark caused it to explode, injuring several of them. This accident was seen by some of the men as a sign of divine judgment against their actions, and their morale collapsed. Back in the Tower of London, Guy Fawkes was subjected to brutal torture over the course of several days. The rack was a device designed to stretch the human body until the joints dislocated, and the pain was excruciating. Despite his initial resolve, the agony eventually broke his silence, and he began to reveal the names of his co-conspirators. His signature on the confession document is a trembling and barely legible scrawl, a haunting testament to the physical trauma he endured. With the names in hand, the government forces mobilized to hunt down the remaining traitors who were now trapped at Holbeach House. On the morning of November 8th, the Sheriff of Worcester and his posse of 200 men surrounded Holbeach House, and a fierce gunfight ensued. The conspirators, knowing they would face a gruesome execution if captured, chose to fight to the death. Robert Catesby and Thomas Percy were killed by a single musket ball that passed through both of them, and John Wright and his brother were also shot dead. The surviving conspirators, including a wounded Thomas Wintour, were taken into custody and transported to London to stand trial. The leader was dead, but the government was determined to make a public example of everyone involved. The surviving plotters were imprisoned in the Tower of London, where they awaited their trial in damp and squalid conditions. The entire country was in a state of hysteria, with anti-Catholic sentiment reaching a fever pitch. Bonfires were lit across London to celebrate the king's survival, a tradition that would eventually evolve into an annual event. The government used the plot as propaganda to reinforce the dangers of Catholicism and to justify harsher laws against recusants. The trial was scheduled for January of 1606 at Westminster Hall, the very building the plotters had intended to destroy. The trial was a grand piece of political theater designed to demonstrate the mercy of the king and the wickedness of the traitors. Sir Edward Coke, the Attorney General, led the prosecution and delivered a scathing speech that painted the conspirators as agents of the devil. The men pleaded not guilty, not because they denied their actions, but because they rejected the specific charges in the indictment. The outcome was never in doubt, and the jury returned a guilty verdict for all the defendants. They were sentenced to be drawn hung, and quartered the traditional penalty for high treason, which was designed to be as prolonged and painful as possible. The executions took place over 2 days in late January 1606, with the first group meeting their end at St. Paul's Churchyard. The condemned men were dragged through the streets of London on hurdles, while the crowds jeered and threw filth at them. They were then hanged until they were half dead, cut down while still conscious, and their bodies were mutilated before the eyes of the spectators. It was a gruesome spectacle, intended to strike terror into the hearts of anyone who might consider rising against the crown. The final group, including Guy Fawkes, was taken to the old palace yard at Westminster, facing the building they tried to blow up. Guy Fawkes was the last to ascend the scaffold on January 30, first weakened by torture and illness. He required assistance to climb the ladder, but he maintained his composure until the very end. In a final act of defiance, or perhaps a desperate bid for a quicker death, Fawkes jumped from the ladder, breaking his neck and dying instantly. By doing so, he cheated the executioner of the full ritual of being cut down alive, and quartered though his lifeless body was still subjected to the butchery. The heads of the conspirators were placed on spikes on London Bridge as a grim warning to all who entered the city. The aftermath of the Gunpowder Plot had profound and lasting consequences for Catholics in England for generations. New laws were passed that prohibited Catholics from practicing law, serving as officers in the military, or voting in elections. They were forced to take an oath of allegiance, denying the Pope's authority to depose kings, which further marginalized their community. The plot cemented the idea in the Protestant mind that Catholicism was equated with treason and foreign influence. It would take another 200 years before Catholic emancipation would begin to restore their civil rights. The legacy of the Gunpowder Plot is remembered every year on the 5th of November in the United Kingdom as Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night. People light bonfires and set off fireworks to commemorate the failure of the plot and the survival of the king. Effigies of Guy Fawkes are often burned on the fire, a tradition that has lost much of its sectarian bitterness and become a community celebration. However, the image of the man in the mask has also been adopted by modern protest movements as a symbol of resistance against tyranny, flipping the historical narrative on its head. Historians still debate certain aspects of the plot, including the extent of the government's prior knowledge. Some theories suggest that Robert Cecil knew about the conspiracy early on and allowed it to proceed to entrap the Catholics and solidify his own power. The convenient arrival of the Monteagle Letter and the specific timing of the discovery have led to speculation that the plotters were merely pawns in a larger political game. While there is no definitive proof of a government set up, the efficiency with which Cecil used the plot to crush his enemies is undeniable. The cellars of the Houses of Parliament are still searched by the yeomen of the guard before every state opening of Parliament, a ceremonial tradition that dates back to the plot. It serves as a symbolic reminder of the fragility of government and the constant threat of treason. The lantern that Guy Fawkes carried on that fateful night is preserved in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, a tangible relic of the conspiracy. These artifacts and rituals keep the story alive, bridging the gap between the 17th century and the modern world. The character of Guy Fawkes himself has undergone a fascinating transformation from a reviled traitor to a folk anti-hero. In the graphic novel and film V for Vendetta, his stylized mask became a global icon for anonymity and rebellion against oppressive states. This modern reinterpretation ignores his actual goal, which was to install a theocratic Catholic regime, but it speaks to the power of symbols to evolve. The man who wanted to blow up Parliament is now, ironically, often associated with the defense of personal liberty. Ultimately, the Gunpowder Plot serves as a stark reminder of how religious extremism and political disenfranchisement can lead to horrific violence. The conspirators believed they were acting righteously to save their souls and their country, yet their methods would have resulted in mass murder. It is a story of desperate men pushed to the brink and a government that responded with ruthless efficiency. The line between terrorist and freedom fighter is often drawn by history, but the intent to kill hundreds of innocents remains the defining fact of the plot. As we look back on the events of 1605, we are left with a chilling question of what might have been. If the gunpowder had ignited, the entire structure of the English government would have been obliterated, creating a power vacuum that could have led to civil war or foreign invasion. The course of British and world history would have been radically altered in a split second. The survival of King James ensured the continuation of the Protestant monarchy and the eventual union of the crowns, shaping the nation we know today. The Gunpowder Plot remains one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in terms of the full extent of the conspiracy and the potential involvement of other high-ranking figures. While the core group was identified, and executed, whispers of wider support have always lingered in the historical record. It stands as a testament to the turbulent nature of the era and the enduring power of a story that combines danger, betrayal, and the narrow escape from catastrophe. The 5th of November will forever be etched in history as the night the sky over London almost turned to fire. So the next time you see a firework bloom in the night sky, remember the man in the cellar with his match and his watch. Remember the 36 barrels of powder that sat silent in the dark, waiting for a command that never came. The Gunpowder Plot was a failure in execution, but a triumph in memory, ensuring that the names of Catesby and Fawkes would never be forgotten. It is a dark chapter in the book of history, but one that continues to captivate our imagination with its high stakes and dramatic conclusion.